Welcome to Elevate Church online experience. If this is your very first time, karibu sana. Thank you for joining us.
If you have subscribed, thumbs up. If you have not, please do and click like and share.
Praise and worship, yay! Today we will be led by the Rocks Church and Gateway Church.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old made new, Jesus, when I met you. Oh, it was the day you called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Yeah. Here we go. All right. Come on, I want you to sing with me. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing, now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you call my name, here we go, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Yeah, you called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Come on, somebody, make some noise. Hey! What a glorious day! Come on!
We bring you praise. amongst family and friends, we bring you praise and we lift up the mighty name that is Jesus. Come on, church. Sing, you are here. You are here, moving in our midst. We worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship. Let's sing that again. And you are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is. Sing, you are here. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. I worship. You're turning lives around. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, man in every heart. I worship you. I worship you. 'Cause you are Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that, come on, sing. That is who you are. And that is who you are. 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 And that is who you are. 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 It's who you are. Forever faithful God. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop, no. Even
week 2 of What Are You Expecting series. If you did miss the very first one, we encourage you to go back to our YouTube channel, Elevate YouTube, and you will find it there so that you can catch up.
Well, hey there to our online family. Great to have you with us again, and particularly also those of you joining us for the first time. Welcome. We love to have you on this journey that we're on together. This is actually week 2 of a series that we launched last week called What Are You Expecting? And the backstory for this series it comes from a time where the Israelites, who were God's chosen people, they'd been freed from centuries of slavery and captivity from Egypt, and they were making their way to the promised land, something that God had promised them, or somewhere that God had promised them. And we find them in the wilderness, just in this in-between phase between being released from captivity before entering the land God had promised them. And they were wandering around in the desert. And as time went on and they hadn't entered the promised land, they got grumpy, they got despondent, they started lowering their expectations, started losing hope, started actually getting angry at God, and actually started looking to alternatives to the God that they had worshipped for so long. You know, like as if they were saying, like, God, you're not doing your job, or you're not doing your job well enough, or you're not doing your job the way we expected you would. And so we're kind of maybe looking for plan B here. And God, at the time the people were being led by Moses, God staged an intervention. God wanted to arrest their attention. God wanted to actually bring them back to Him. And so He reminded them, He declared and reminded them of 5 crucial truths that He wanted them to either know about Him or be reminded of who He is. And ultimately, when we understand who God is, we know that that's actually the foundation for what God ultimately does. And so God showed up in front of Moses and said this: Yahweh, the Lord, the God of compassion and mercy. I'm slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. And this is exactly the basis of this series, What Are You Expecting? The 5 things that God revealed or reminded about Himself. We're going to drill into one of them for each of these 5 weeks. So this is week 2. And last week, I started with the first thing that God said, that He is a God of compassion. And because He's a God of compassion, that as we follow Him, as we put our trust in Him, as we get close to Him, we can expect God's compassion. And if you missed that, I would strongly encourage you to go back and watch that. And of course, as always, share that with friends of yours who need to know that God is a God of compassion. 20 years ago, I was reading my Bible, reading through Genesis, the creation account and the story of the first family and the story of how God set things in motion. And it's a pretty epic tale, a pretty epic series of events. And I remember just getting to very early in this book of Genesis, chapter 6 to be precise, and I read something that just knocked me off my seat. See, I was reading this time in history where God's people, God's creation, that essentially lost interest in God. That essentially walked away from Him. They put everything else first. They were living reckless and selfishly. And God, well, to say He got a little ticked off is a huge understatement. In fact, God got to the point where He decided that He was going to wipe everything out and start over. Earth and creation version 2.0, which is a pretty big call. You know, He created things in the first place, and yes, they got broken pretty early on. But to get to the point where God felt His only play was to start like a complete start over, destroy everyone and everything and start again from scratch. It's massive. And I'm reading that, I'm thinking, wow, you know, like, And then these words jumped off the page. But Noah found favor with the Lord. And from that moment forward, God actually instructed Noah. God actually said to Noah, okay, I'm going to pull back a little bit. I'm going to destroy everyone except for you and your household. But Noah found favor with the Lord, and God gave him the instructions to build a boat. We often call it an ark, that was to be 140 meters long. It's like about 500 feet long. Huge. Longer than an NFL football pitch, a gridiron, and which was just absurd. I mean, God said, I want you to build this boat because I'm going to flood the earth, and the flood's going to destroy everybody, but you're going to be on this boat, and you and the your family and the creatures on this boat, you're going to survive. Just insane. Insane, first of all, because Noah wasn't even a builder. So God pitches up to a guy who's not even a builder and says, I want you to build a boat 140 meters long, a gigantic boat. I mean, that's like, he might as well have said that to me. And I was on record last week as saying I struggled to assemble 2 IKEA building bookcases where they provide you with instructions and the only tool required, an Allen key. And I still messed that up. So Noah's not a builder, and God comes to him and says, I want you to build a big, big boat. And secondly, it wasn't even raining at the time. So why would anybody in their right mind think that, yeah, I'm not a builder, but God asked me to build a 140 meter long boat. And secondly, it's not even raining, but God said, build it now for the coming rains or the coming floods. And a little spoiler, although many of you will know this story from history, Noah said yes, and Noah got about building this boat. I'll come back to that later on. So God declared to the people of Israel as they're wandering around the wilderness, losing hope, lowering their expectations, that he was a God of compassion and mercy. I want to focus on that second one this week. Now, the word mercy can often be interchanged with the word grace and can often be interchanged with the word favor. Mostly interchangeable, not 100% overlap, but mostly interchangeable. I want to just lean into this word favor this week. And there's a few definitions. The one I'm going to underline for us is favor means to endorse. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say you write a book, and when you are coming near to the finish line of writing the book, you will typically look for somebody else to write the foreword. And what you'll look for, if you know what to do, you'll look for somebody who's ahead of you, somebody who's got more credibility than you. Maybe they themselves are an established author. And you'll ask them to write the foreword, and they'll write the foreword, and on the cover of the book, whilst it'll have the title of the book, it'll have you as the author, it'll also say at the bottom of the book, foreword by such and such. And that person there, having their endorsement gives you a leg up, gives you an advantage, gives you a head start, if you like, that they are doing you a favor. Oprah Winfrey, when she had her book club, she would have a book of the month that she would endorse. And, without her endorsement, probably the book, whatever the book of that month was, it might have sold a few thousand copies, give or take. But with Oprah's endorsement, saying this is my recommended, my endorsed book this month, those books would go on to sell hundreds of thousands of copies. Oprah did that author a favor. Oprah gave them an advantage, a leg up, gave them some assistance. So God says that he is the God of compassion and the God of mercy or grace or favor. And because of that, just like we can expect God's compassion, we can also expect God's favor. Now, full disclosure, while I love this topic of God's favor, and whilst I have endeavored and do endeavor to live with God's favor every single day, I've only preached on this once in 20 years as a preacher. And the big reason I've only preached on this once, even though I think it's an incredibly important topic, and that's why we're preaching on it today, is because it is so easy to get a wonky, janky misunderstanding, and having potentially a misunderstanding of what it is to have God's favor in your life can just take you and other people way, way off course. And here's a few things that could take you off course, and I want to just put these out there before I get into preaching about favor. Let me tell you what favor isn't, so that we can get clarity and hopefully not get bent off course. Number one, God's love and God's favor are not the same thing. God's love is something that He gives to us for free, and it's unconditional. It's a free gift, and it has no bearing on what we've done. And in fact, He gives it to us despite the dumb things that we've done. By contrast, when it comes to favor, we do actually have a role to play. And I'll come back to that later. Another thing that can send people off topic or off message is if they think that living with God's favor means that only good things will happen to you. Nothing will ever go wrong. Nothing will ever go bad. Nothing bad will ever happen. You'll never be disappointed again because you only have good things because you're living with God's favor. Well, that's also not true. Okay, so throw that brochure out. It's not the whole story. And the third thing that's caused me to be, I guess, a little reticent over the last 20 years to preach on this topic more often is that some people have taken the notion that to live with God's favor is all about getting newer and better and bigger and shinier. Now, God's not against us experiencing and having newer, better, shinier, bigger. However, that's not the main purpose of Him giving us His favor. The main purpose of Him giving us His favor is so that we will live out the purpose that He's called us to, and in doing so, that will bring Him glory. See, the things that God's called you to do and the levels that God's called you to go to, you're going to need some assistance. You're not going to be able to get there on your own. And here's the thing. As you commit to fulfilling God's purpose and as you commit to living out God's purpose, God's going to give you some favor. And with that assistance, that leg up, that head start, that endorsement, you're going to move to levels and you're going to do things that you couldn't have done in your own strength. And because of that, people in your sphere are going to look at you and look to you and look at what is playing out for you. And they're going to know this guy, this girl, they seem to have an advantage. And in that, you get to point to God and you get to bring Him glory. Because here's some of the things that favor can do in your life. Favor can open doors that you can't open. Favor can cause good breaks to come your way, can cause the right people to come your way, can cause you to get the business deal that you bid for amidst some other people bidding for it. God's favor can cause you to get the promotion that you didn't even think you were next in line for. And it's often said that one touch of God's favor is worth years of your labor. You can't explain it, and importantly, you can't take credit for it. And so here we have this situation with Noah, where God's committing to destroy the entire earth and then drops this in there, but Noah found favor with the Lord. Well, why Noah? What was it that Noah did or knew, or why did God choose to spare him, and not only spare him, but give him this enormous privilege of fulfilling this very monumental purpose in his seemingly otherwise, to this point, ordinary life? Well, it's often said that success leaves clues. It's also true that favor leaves clues. And so right after this declaration, but Noah found favor with the Lord, we read, this is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, there's a clue, the only blameless person living on earth at the time. In other words, he refused to compromise, he lived with integrity, he did what was right even despite opposition, or this one, despite nobody else doing it. And he walked in close fellowship with God. He prioritized God and his relationship with God above everything else. And then we zip down a little bit further in history. So Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. So we now know that Noah epitomized doing the right thing, epitomized putting his relationship with God number one. And here we have that Noah epitomized obedience. Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. So what I want to do with the time we have remaining is I want to zoom in on this idea of obedience. So if you've got your Bible app handy or your paper Bible handy, how about you grab that and open it with me to Luke chapter 16. Now, while you're doing that, let me give you a bit of context. Luke was a doctor. He wasn't one of Jesus' hand-picked 12 followers. He was a medical doctor. And after Jesus had died and rose again, and the early church was forming, most of that was being done. The story of Jesus' resurrection, the way that followers should live, that was being passed around verbally. And it was gaining momentum, but Luke decided he wanted to investigate this for himself and potentially, if this was all actually true, maybe record it so that more and more people could learn and live from what Jesus did in his public life. And so this is part of Luke, because he went about recording eyewitness testimonies. This is a part of him documenting one of the eyewitness testimonies of people that were present when Jesus taught this particular slice that I'm going to drop us into. Before I do, though, and I mentioned this was all about obedience, a couple of months ago, we taught a series called Chasing Purpose, and it was phenomenal. The feedback we got was just so encouraging that people were set free for what it means to live out God's purpose in their lives. And the big idea that we taught in that series is that God has both a general purpose and a specific purpose. That there's a general purpose that he calls all Jesus followers to actually do and get into. And then there's a specific purpose, which is going to be something he might call you specifically to do, but not me specifically to do. And the metaphor we used was a freeway. We called it God's freeway of purpose, that all Jesus followers are called to get on the freeway and start moving in the same direction. And recognize that that freeway has multiple lanes, and within the freeway, your specific purpose will be revealed once you're generally on the freeway. You'll get to know what lane God's called you to actually drive in. Well, that exact same concept can be applied to obedience, that there is a bunch of things that God calls all Jesus followers to do, to obey him in. And then within that, there's going to be some specific things that God's going to call you to do, that he wants you to do. Just like Noah, he was the only person that was called to build this boat, build this ark. But first of all, he was on the general freeway of obedience, that he was living right at that point in his life. So Jesus is teaching, This is what Luke recorded. Jesus is teaching, and he drops 3 massive, massive truth bombs that are calls to obedience. And I just want to hit them really quick. These could be 3 separate messages. This could be a whole series in and of itself. But let me just quickly hit them as we learn some of what Jesus calls all his followers to do. First of all, he said, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. See, some people have the misconception that God acts like an irresponsible grandparent. You know the one I'm talking about. The one that gives your kids lollies and sugary drinks, and you're saying, no, don't give that to them. And they say, oh, it's okay. That it won't kill them. And you're like, oh, I'm going to kill you. See, God's not an irresponsible grandparent. God's actually a responsible father, and he's looking for us to be trustworthy, worthy of trust, with very little, to know that if he can then give us some more, and we'll continue to be trustworthy. He doesn't waste resources. And the rookie mistake that a lot of people make is they think, well, I've only got a little. I'm low on the food chain in my company's organizational chart. I don't have much responsibility. I'm only leading a very small group in my team. I'm only leading a very small group in the group that God's given me. And God says, yep, I want to actually give you more, but I first need to see you demonstrate that you can be trusted with very little, because if you're not able to be trusted with little, how can I know for sure that I can trust you with more? Because God says, I don't waste resources. So that's the first thing. Be trustworthy with whatever God has put in your hand at this moment in time, and out of that obedience, you can expect God's favor. And then Jesus said, so if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, money, who will trust you with true riches? And, this is something that some people miss. Again, it's a rookie mistake. People think, well, I'm interested in things of the kingdom. I'm interested in things of God. I don't really have much time for money. I don't really think about money. I don't really manage the money that God's entrusted to me. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know where it goes. I don't keep track. I just spend what I want to spend, and I don't save, and I don't give, and I don't, because it's money, I'm into serving God, and God would say, yeah, I want you to serve me and don't serve money. However, I do call you to manage the money that I've entrusted to you. And actually, because it's less important, I need to see if you're going to first demonstrate that you can be trusted with money, which is less important, before I want to actually give you responsibility to manage true riches. So actually, every year here at Elevate, we teach a series on money management. Not just giving, although giving is a slice of it, but God has a lot to say about money management. And actually, so our next series, launching next month, is all about managing money. It's called Keep the Change. And so let your friends know, make sure you're here for that. And we're going to drill into what it means and help us live out this thing that Jesus taught. If you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who would trust you with true riches? And then finally, Jesus said, and if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? And this one, boy, God teed off in my heart and my life with this one number of years ago. A friend of mine, he was renting a rental house, and I asked him, one day, hey, what did you do this weekend? And he said, I put reticulation into my house. And I said to him, what? You installed reticulation in your house? Aren't you renting? He's like, yeah. I said, so did they pay? Did the owner, the landlord, did they pay you for the labor, materials? No, I offered to pay. and I offered to do the work, and that's what I did. And I said to him, do you understand this is a rental property? What are you doing paying for and installing reticulation there? His name's Steve. Steve quoted this principle that Jesus taught. He said, I actually hope in the near future to own my own house, to be able to buy my own house. And Jesus said, if you're not trustworthy with what's someone else's, who would give you your own? And I was like, well, there you have it, people. There's a revelation. And I've carried that through, and that can be applied to so many levels. That can be applied to you in the job you're in the business you're in. Work at it like you own it, with the same level of dedication and ownership that you would if you owned it. That in every endeavor. You're following a leader in your church or in your team or in your small group. Commit to them and submit to them and follow them and offer yourself to them like you were the leader, like you were the one running the show. And you know what? You can expect God's favor. So look, that's just a flyover. I mean, this topic of favor we could probably teach on for weeks as well. We'll come back to it maybe, hopefully, in less than 20 years' time. But definitely join us again next week, where we're going to teach on expecting God's patience. He declared that he's slow to anger. Phew! Good to know. So we'd love to see you back. We'd love to see you bring someone with you, have them join you on the couch. Share this with your friends from YouTube and Facebook and Vimeo. Let them know that this series is happening. Become part of Elevate's online family. And we look forward to seeing you back here again next week.
Giving is a blessing, and our giving ways are down here below the screen. Thank you for staying with us today. We hope you are blessed as we were. And next week, we will be having What Are You Expecting? 3 series. See you then.